and he's on vacation this week.
Yeah, it only gets, well, wait a minute. No, it's not. Sorry, folks.
I'm not sure whether the Lexington, the one that's identified as the Lexington Fayette Urban County Government, whether that might be Councilmember Brown or whether that's someone else. But maybe Councilmember Brown.
So, all right, it is 6:30. Shall we begin? All right, Ray, I'll kick it over to you to read the statements.
Yes, ma'am. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, state of emergency, and Governor Beshear's executive orders regarding social distancing, this meeting is being held via teleconference pursuant to Senate Bill 150 as signed by the governor on March 30th, 2020, and Attorney General Opinion 20-05, in accordance with KRS 61.826, because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Glad you are here. Glad to see your faces. But no, if you need to put your avatar up, that's fine as well. I'm glad to see your faces. Ray and I are glad you're here around the table to discuss this very important issue that the mayor has tasked us with. Because we may have some viewers who were not able to join us in our previous meeting, I always like to do introductions again. So if you just give your name and tell us who you are and whatever else you want to tell us. And I'm going to actually throw an extra question at you as you give your introduction. I would also like for you to share with the subcommittee and with those that are watching, when do you feel most at home? Whether it's a place, a feeling, a smell, something that you eat, when do you feel most at home? So I will kick it off and ask Lori to begin.
I'm Laurie Bruck, and I am the senior priest at St. Michael's Episcopal Church in the Zandale neighborhood. And I feel most at home, probably an unexpected thing, but I ride horses. So I feel most at home when I am covered in hay and sweat and on the back of a horse and just quiet.
Nice. How about David?
I'm David Shirey, Senior Minister at Central Christian Church at Martin Luther King and East Short Street downtown. I would say I feel most at home when I'm in places that are familiar to me, people and environment and activities that are familiar to me. I feel at home. It can be in many different places, but that would be the common thread.
Thank you. Harding.
Hi, I'm Harding Dowell. I'm an architect with Group 4 Architecture Research and Planning. And I feel most at home when I'm on our couch next to my wife after both kids are finally asleep and we can sort of exhale.
Thank you. Rachel.
I'm Rachel Childress, CEO of Lexington Habitat for Humanity. Sorry, I can't figure out how to get my name up there. I'm most at home when I'm with my children and my grandchildren.
Representative Brown.
Good evening. I'm Representative George Brown. I represent the 77th Legislative House District. And I'm most comfortable in the environment where I'm working with and helping people.
Great. Mr. Hodge.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Hodge, known as Hodge, and I guess I'm most at home when I'm around family and friends.
All right. Russ, you're up.
All right. Yeah, my name is Russ Barclay, Executive Director with the Lexington Community Land Trust. And I feel most at home when with loved ones, and particularly when we're in our neighborhood and neighbors are also out, whether it's raking leaves or snow, shoveling snow, but just those points of interaction when we're able to say hi to one another.
Great. Councilman Brown.
Thank you. I'm First District Councilman James Brown. I feel like I'm most at home when my grown children are back home and around me. I'm glad that they're grown and they moved out, but there's a sense of security and familiarity when they're around and are at home. So that's when I feel most comfortable. Thank you.
Ms. Lynch, may I just throw something in real quick?
Yes, please do.
Councilmember Brown, they still call me Councilmember Brown, so I have to tell people I'm the former First District Councilmember Brown. I'm a state representative now, so if they get us mixed up, that's what's happening.
We're glad you're both here around this table. Mr. Shine.
Hi, I'm Rich Shine. I'm a professor and associate dean at UK. I probably should say that I'm most at home with my family, but after 4 months of lockdown, I'd be honest and say I'm more at home when I'm playing soccer on the soccer field.
Ray.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Raymond Sexton. I'm the Executive Director of the Lexington Human Rights Commission. And home to me, you know, mentioning the lockdown is a new meeting with, you know, the safety and security, having your family around, doing projects, just that bonding that we've hopefully all got to experience during the shutdown, and a little more togetherness. So my kids are at that age where they might be going off and doing things now. So I'm definitely not taking these moments for granted. So having them around and just bonding as a family has been what home really means to me.
And I will, Mr. Howard, would you like to join in? Eric Howard, as our staff liaison with the city.
Thank you. Eric Howard, as Ms. Lynch said, staff liaison with the city. I work in human resources for LFUCG. Probably most at home, either with my wife and adult kids, or had a large extended family in Louisville, and anytime with them. I'm right back in Louisville and growing up among a bunch of cousins and aunts and uncles. So any of those is great for me.
Thank you. And I guess I will go last. I'm Shayla Lynch. I am with Ampersand Sexual Violence Resource Center. And I think I feel most at home at my family reunions. We had to cancel this year due to the state of our world, but when my family is pretty large. And so whenever we're all together, no matter where that is, in the backyard or at a hotel or on the softball field, that's when I feel most at home, when I'm with all of my family and friends. All right, I don't think did I leave anyone out? Did I get everyone, I think? All right, awesome. Mr. Howard sent out the minutes from our prior meeting. I think we need to approve those. Are there any corrections, any things we need to change? Hopefully you've had time to review them.
No, but if we're following Robert's rules, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. We've had a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor, please be made by showing your hands, raising your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? All right, thank you. Minutes have been approved. And I just want to also thank Mr. Howard again for taking our minutes for us during these meetings. That is a big help, a very, very big help. We appreciate that. Moving on, following down our agenda, from our first meeting, we kind of wanted you all to give us some feedback about some of the goals and objectives you thought we should tackle and accomplish as for our subcommittee. And so those are listed in the minutes, but we wanted to continue to dig a little deeper and really just talk about gentrification. It's a large elephant, and as Ray and I have talked already, the way you eat an elephant is at one bite at a time. So we're going to start taking those bites intentionally, and talk about what gentrification looks like in this city, regarding the African-American experience through the African-American lens, what neighborhoods are affected, how they have been changed and affected, negatively, positively, and what can, the city do to help those neighbors, those homeowners, those neighborhood associations, tackle this beast successfully. And I know that this is a big issue, and we have a deadline. We have a deadline, but I think that we can, amongst this group, come up with some ideas and strategies, even if it's just a few that the city can actually take to start to tackle this issue here in Lexington. And I put just a definition of gentrification. And I got this actually from Professor Matt Wilson from UK. He did a presentation for the Neighborhoods and Transition Task Force. And in his presentation, he presented this definition of gentrification, and I really liked it. I thought that it was representative of some things that we've seen in not only our city, but other cities when it comes to gentrification. So that is just a definition that we can expand upon and work from if we want to. But I just wanted to get into just kind of discussing some of the contributing factors to regarding gentrification as it relates to Lexington here, thinking about our city and the things that we're dealing with. So I want to open the floor for discussion, and wherever this discussion takes us, we'll continue on that path.
Shayla, could you read the definition for the people that are watching live on YouTube?
Sure. I'll be happy to. The definition is the process of neighborhood upgrading by relatively affluent incomers who move into a poorer neighborhood in sufficient numbers to displace lower income groups and transform its social identity. And I'll read it one more time. The process of neighborhood upgrading by relatively affluent incomers who move into a poorer neighborhood in sufficient numbers to displace lower income groups and transform its social identity. Thank you. And I think we've seen this happen in our city, definitely. So who would like to start us off? All right, Representative Brown.
Yeah, I like the definition, and I think it speaks to the issues that we have in our community. I think one of the things that has to be addressed, number one, is home ownership for the poor people and the poor residents of our community, and to at least identify and have people identify the neighborhood's character and the people who have historically lived there. Because of gentrification, I think that's something that's happening across our community is that people are moving in, and it's difficult to argue about bricks and mortar and investment in a community, but that has to be taken into consideration as we consider the fiber and the essence of the communities that we have in Lexington. So I wanted to, I'm glad I'm on this committee for those reasons. I think that people have to speak up for people who don't have a voice. One of the things I've heard as a state representative is that everybody has a lobbyist except poor people.
That's good. Would someone else like to chime in?
Are there?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Are there neighborhoods in like the Lexington Fayette urban area that have been identified as particularly ravaged by gentrification?
There are, if I included in the email today and last week, those maps show some areas that have particularly been hit hard, and it is sit down by specifics, but there are some identified neighborhoods, through those maps that have been hit pretty hard.
Because following up on Mr. Brown's comment. How do we get their voices heard?
I think that's important. One thing we can do is we can invite folks to come and speak to us during our subcommittee meetings and to share their stories, and if they're willing to, not to exploit them in any way, but if anyone is willing to come and share their stories about how their neighborhood has changed, I think that we can definitely do that. I think we can definitely do that.
And as we mentioned last week, there will be an opportunity for some town hall meetings. They're in the process of getting those set up. Looks like our committee is going to be also with the Public Safety Committee. And they're going to combine those two subcommittees for the town hall, where we'll be able to listen to stories and ask or get asked questions, and get some guidance as far as, those affected by gentrification can tell their stories and kind of help guide this committee to make the decisions that's going to be impactful and meaningful, and not just something that looks good on paper. That's something that's actually going to be able to elicit change.
Mr. Sexton, did you say that would be combined with public safety in the town hall?
I believe that's what they told us today. It's still being discussed and finalized, and I think that's the working model. But they're going to let us know. But there will be an opportunity at town hall where people can talk to us.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a tentative date for that?
Yes, I believe ours was going to be August 4th.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that word going to get out, Ray? And as far as to the people that we want to hear from?
Yeah, they're working right now. They're going to be working with Civic Lex to kind of organize and get the word out, and be the moderator of the town hall forums and things of that nature. And I'm sure with everybody associated with the entire commission will be helping and getting the word out. But again, I don't know specifically how they're going to tackle it right now because they're still trying to finalize it, but there will be opportunities to publicize it and get the word out.
And I would certainly hope then also that, recognizing we have members of our community listening on YouTube, that they obviously are listening because they have a tremendous interest in this, and that they would then be able to get the word out to various people that in their constituencies and communities.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I would also like to kind of say, I think and I know a lot of people don't agree with this, but I think if you look at gentrification, you'll also see code enforcement is in that area as well. A third of code enforcement violations was in the East End area, and you'll see a lot of gentrification in that area. So I think we also need to dig real deep into that department and find out if it's driven by investors or is it really driven by the neighbors, because I don't think those neighborhoods really have neighbors calling on each other. I think it's the investors, and that's their tool to get the property in that area. So we need to look at that real deep. And from the meeting, the town hall meeting that we had, it was standing room only. So, and a lot of the issues was code enforcement that was brought up there. So we might need to dig deep into that department.
And let me just clarify, the town hall meeting you're discussing is the one that the Neighborhoods and Transition Task Force had.
That is correct.
A year ago. Okay, I
Yes.
just don't want to confuse people on YouTube that thinking we had a town hall meeting already without them. That's not the case.
I'd just like to say that's an excellent point, and I don't know how we can get into that and put teeth into it, but I think it's certainly something we need to look at, because if there is collusion with homeowners in talking about putting code enforcement on neighborhoods, that is problematic.
Can we
I'm glad you both. Go ahead, Lori. Sorry.
I was saying, can we get a like 5 years worth of or 3 years worth of code enforcement? And are the complainants public? I mean, is that taken down? I mean, that would be part of it is do we have are there records that show who called in the complaint? If they're not, that might be something to address. But if there are, can we get some time period of those records made public to see, is there a repeated pattern of one or two or a handful of investors using code enforcement for their business ends?
Well, first of all, to kind of update you on code enforcement, they complaint driven, but you never know where it's coming from. So you're not able to stand in front of your accuser. Now, I'm out East End every day because I have a large amount of rentals in that area. There's not a day that does not go by, I don't see at least one code enforcement, most of the time two. When I come home, and probably in the areas that you guys live in, y'all might not even know what code enforcement is because you won't see them.
Yeah, one thing I noticed I'm glad you brought this up, doing a little research earlier today, noted that there is a map that shows the code enforcement issues. And if you overlaid that map on the maps that we were given of at-risk neighborhoods, they overlay pretty exactly. And I think that even if the homeowners don't find out who made the complaint, do we know if the city has that record when the complaint is made, or are they made anonymously?
They do not know. There's no traceability.
Yeah,
It seems like a structural problem.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, Mr. Hodge makes a good point. People can't face their accuser, even if it's perhaps not tied into the criminal justice system per se. I think that may be a place to start, to say that if it's a code enforcement issue, then the person has to leave their name.
Well, Richard said in the last meeting, he said, let's call it like it is. You have a lot of white investors that come in that area, and that's their only thing they want to go out with at the end of the day is a big purse. I'm probably the largest African American investor in Lexington. So I'm on the island by myself. I don't mind talking about code enforcement because I'm there. There's nobody I can hide behind, but they can hide behind each other all day. And it's not right, but I mean, that's what's going on. And nobody wants to police the code enforcement. Who polices the code enforcement? I've been asking that question. Nobody never gives me an answer. So it's like whatever they say, it's the law. You have no record of anywhere on that particular with them.
Now, there are some specific recommendations. We're a little bit later on the agenda. We're going to go through the neighborhoods in transition recommendations, some that have been supported by the task force and some that are still on the table. And I know there in the past, again, with the neighborhoods in transition task force, we've had some presentations by code enforcement, and there are some specific recommendations on there pertaining to code enforcement. So my suggestion is maybe wait until we get to that document. Obviously, code enforcement is a good place to start. I'm not saying that, but we may be, but they already, and I can't remember from, reading it earlier, top of my head, but after we go through it, we can see what's already on there pertaining to code enforcement. And then if we want to make different recommendations, in addition to those, we can.
James, help me, but I think the three ways that I remember that code enforcement is initiated and their review of properties across the city is initiated. One is the comprehensive, where they pick a geographic area. Two is by complaint, and then I think, what's the third one? I think there's a third one, but I know those two that I remember.
Well, the one by practice, I don't think right now, code enforcement is only complaint based. So Hodge is right. I mean, they can do comprehensive geographically, but they don't typically do that. It has to be complaint based. And yeah, they are anonymous for several reasons, but I think code enforcement can speak to it better than me. And then one of the reasons that some of these neighborhoods have a high concentration, and there's no excuse, is that they're the most densely populated neighborhoods in the city. And then also they have some of the older housing stock. So that's why a lot of them, you know, get cited and there's a high concentration. But I think what we have talked about, and I think kind of what's been said today is the question is, and what can we do to make sure that code enforcement is not being weaponized? And then also what can we do, or what can we address to make sure that folks, that the information is communicated correctly? You get a code enforcement letter and it might be like reading the Holy Grail, just because it's so much information and you don't necessarily know, you know, when the start date of the process is, and what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to be contacting. So I know that's been a topic of conversation about how we can make that language more understandable for the folks that get cited, and how do we relay resources that can be used to address some of the issues. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done with code enforcement in regards to neighborhoods that are feeling the pressures of gentrification.
They have from what I gather, absolute power to I guess cite property owners, and property owners have no recourse. They essentially have no recourse, and they must do and or complete the recommendations, regardless of how much it costs.
Well, it's a process to it. I think, you know, they can, and what we have talked about is some of it is structural. We have to talk about how the, you know, some structures need to be in place so it's consistent, because what we're seeing in some cases is there's inconsistency in communication with the code enforcement department and with the homeowner. So, you know, I think there's opportunity to build some consistency across there. But, you know, where we're feeling or where we're seeing and hearing people's frustration with the process tends to be in the neighborhoods identified on the maps and the ones that we're talking about. So there's obviously opportunity there to address some of these concerns.
I wanted to chime in that I think a lot of the code enforcement conversation is indicative of years of persistent disinvestment from communities, and they're coupled with that, then properties being devalued. And I think like that's when we go back to that definition of gentrification, I think that's an element that was missing from that. And particularly when we talk about the systemic nature of it, is it is those upgrades by relative affluent incomers in communities that have been disinvested from over a long time, and the property values have been devalued, which opens up for oftentimes investments to be made. People that have cash, that have built either generational wealth or have got wealth, cash on hand to be able to come in and buy properties. So I guess I would want to broaden that definition to include that disinvestment and devaluation.
Could I add something there for a moment? I apologize if you've seen me jumping around. My computer in my office seemed to not work, and so I've moved, and I'm trying to do this on an iPad. I'd like to follow that comment in full agreement, and I'm in danger of dismissing my own colleague's definition of gentrification that started the session. I agree with everything he said. I'm not comfortable with starting with the notion that gentrification is simply about upgrade. Personally, there are many definitions of what an upgrade might be. But more importantly, I think what's missing from that definition is what I would think of as the economic factor. And as somebody who teaches and writes about gentrification, I think I'm going to betray my political leanings and point out that my starting point for gentrification is something called the rent gap. And the rent gap is simply the notion, in simple terms, that gentrification occurs in a place where there is a difference between the present value of a property and the perceived increase in value that might come through redevelopment. It's a little more complicated than that, but it seems to me you have to start with the rent gap. And the rent gap, basically gentrification to me is the exploitation of the rent gap, which results in class-based displacement. And in the American city, that has always also meant racial replacement and community erasure. But if you start with the rent gap, then you get away from this notion of what does upgrade mean. You get away from the kind of passive, there's nobody responsible here. You can say, why do we have this? Why do we have this gap? We know it's about disinvestment in the city. And we can then ask questions about why disinvestment, who's investing, where's the money coming from? And to be honest, it brings in the question of capital, which has never been a part of this. So I'd like to include the notion of the rent gap in the economic and our understanding. Let's just look at sort of both who's responsible for this as well as the agency of, and I would like to second Lori's comment earlier. I'd really like to hear the voices of people in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I don't see them anywhere here.
I'm gonna jump on that pile as well. I think Russ started hitting that nail with the hammer, and I think you co-signed it. I think, you know, one of the things that we talked about early on was we talked about housing affordability and affordable housing. Then I think it was Rachel that mentioned safe affordable housing. That goes into the disinvestment part about it. And I think that's what is one of the factors that create the opportunity for gentrification, is when disinvestment takes place. But when we're in a position, and we are in Lexington, that we need to create and look for more affordable housing opportunities. So when we see affordable housing situations, the opportunities and situations, I almost hate to say that we ignore it, but sometimes there's really no tool in place other than code enforcement to address the disinvestment, if that's making sense. So that's why code enforcement gets pulled into it and becomes, or seems to be to some people as a negative thing, when it's actually the only tool that we have in our toolbox to address the disinvestment that's taking place, that creates the environment for the reinvestment, which causes the displacement. I know those are all basic big words, but it felt like I strung them together for some strange reason. But I think that's all I think that's it. And I think it's strong. If we can say that in a way and maybe work to address that, I think that's something real.
Because that's huge. I mean, code enforcement is that's the only way. We've got to fix that.
Yeah, what else do we have? I mean, seriously, if you gotta, and sometimes I've seen or I've heard situations that if you move too aggressively to address it, then you could displace a family or an individual without providing another option or opportunity for them to stay in the neighborhood. They have to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So that's real.
I do want to circle back around before we get too far away from how do we create a mechanism, and because of our time limit, I think we need to try to address that tonight, to get those voices or representative of those voices here, either speaking to us via this or however we need to do it. Because I think, you know, several of you have pointed out, for some of us, although, you know, I live in a neighborhood where code enforcement is being used. I was watching it today, you know, so that's happening. But how do we get those voices here? What are the ideas, the brainstorming we can do around that tonight before we get too far into more brainstorming?
Yeah, I think that we can invite folks to come and share their stories and experiences, to tell us about how their neighborhood has changed and how they've been negatively affected. I think we can invite folks. We can do that. So we can, if you know of folks, you know, we can definitely invite them to, because we can have guest speakers at our meeting, topic experts, so to speak. We can definitely do that. And I agree. I know we're going to have town halls coming up, but, you know, everybody wants to talk at a town hall, and people may not get heard. And so I think it's very important to hear from the community in doing this work. I think it's required. So I think that we can definitely invite these subject matter experts, so to speak, to come and to speak with us. I think that we can definitely arrange and do that.
Is it worth giving consideration to the survey questions that the Lexington Housing Justice Collective shared with us? They seem to have at least a pulse on who some of these respondents might be, and they're doing a little bit of the legwork for us. It seems foolish to ignore it, even though frankly, I don't know who the members of that group are. But I think that, as you mentioned, Shayla, going beyond just the town hall, I think is necessary, because not everybody's going to be able to be there, and not everybody's going to be able to come to our Zoom meeting. So hitting this from several different directions, I think, is valuable.
To me, the powerful word in that definition that compels my attention is displace. People displaced from their home. And if we can therefore understand from them who or what has displaced them or threatens to displace them, then we raise some questions about accountability. That's a word that I think goes through a lot of the subcommittees of how we hold people and institutions and what ourselves accountable for the way our actions have hurt, in this case, displaced our neighbors. And so that word really is compelling to me, and our trying to discern and hear from them what factors have displaced them or what threatens to displace them.
And David, to follow up on that, I think on some level, there's just a very simple supply issue here. Lexington loves nothing more than a report, and we've had several that have said we're just not building enough housing, and we're building density in places that is encouraging gentrification in some areas, but there's wide swaths of our city that are zoned only for one type of housing, and it's not the type of housing that's affordable to people. And I think that's something that there are examples across the country of cities that have dealt with this successfully, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't look at those.
Speaking of housing stock, I think that another problem that we refuse to deal with routinely is the urban service boundary and how our city is to grow. That's the other elephant in the room, I think. And it's something that certainly is always on the table about who can live in Lexington and who can afford to live in Lexington.
Yeah, I agree. If infill and redevelopment is going to be our only path forward, then the areas open to infill and redevelopment need to be much larger than they currently are.
Well, every time somebody comes up and wants to build a development inside the urban service core, then there's conversation and dissent about whether that property should be zoned or how it should be zoned and who is able to build there and who is able to live there in those particular areas. And that always occurs. And every so often, I can't remember how long, but we have a discussion and a question about the urban service boundary. And the thing is that, in my opinion, it is not a bad thing to have a discussion / debate about preservation or development. The problem I have is that in our community, preservation always wins the argument.
And let's be honest, it's preservation of a very particular type of history.
Yep.
That wins the argument. It's the preservation of the wealthy white history that wins the argument.
And outside the urban service area is that no green grass can be developed in Lexington-Fayette County in the minds of preservationists. And anytime there's a discussion or a move to do something with developing land in our community, it starts a firestorm, and the preservationists always win.
I'm going to be like my terrier when she gets a hold of a chipmunk. I do want to go back to, how do we get the voices here? Because I mean, do we need to plan a meeting date? Do we need to sort of reach out and say, you know, we're going to allot for 60 minutes or 75 minutes or 90 minutes? You know, I think there's just some practicalities, because I'm fearful that it's a good idea and that we're all nodding, and that then we're not going to do the legwork. And it is, because my sense is the voices that we need to hear, maybe those who don't have ready access to Zoom, or, you know, or email, or that there's going to have to be some contact a little more than let's put out a notice.
I'd like to say, I think there are multiple ways to get voices, and I'd like to second Harding's suggestion that we passed over very quickly, that we consider the survey that was sent to us, whether it's that survey or not. I looked at that survey. I thought it looked quite good. I'm not sure we need a top of the line, state of the art social science survey. Does everything for everybody. I think if we had something that convinced us that we had accessed voices in the community.
Hello?
Oh, sorry, am I gone?
We can hear you.
We can hear you, Rich.
Oh, somebody.
We can hear you, Robert.
Sorry. Oh, okay. You know, I just don't think we need to worry about a top of the line social science survey at this point. If we had some assurance of if we worked with people to see how this was distributed in the community. And I think, you know, anecdotal evidence in some ways is as good as any. And so the more we get back, I think that's fine. I'd like to suggest that we might do that, as well as have a public forum. That might obviate the need for a public forum, and we might be able to do some invitations of representatives of a community if we could figure out a way to determine who those appropriately might be.
So, so perhaps between now and our meeting next week, we you're proposing that we work with the community group to distribute the survey?
I would defer to our co-chairs on that one. I think if you're willing, if you can do that, I think that's really fine with me.
Yeah, we can do that.
We can send it out to our homeowners.
That would be great. That would be great.
Do that.
Likewise, we can engage folks here in the South End neighborhood.
I would just add, in terms of getting the word out, that Lori and I have many colleagues, Black clergy colleagues. We recognize very clearly we're both white on this team, but we are pledging to be in contact, and we already have been, with our Black clergy colleagues to ask them for their input, their ideas. And together, Lori and I will certainly pledge to get this survey and the word out through our colleagues to their churches and communities.
But we need to figure out sending the surveys with the tight, again, I hate to always bring up the tight timeline, but we gotta have a definite timeline to get these in, and the ones that we get and then we utilize.
It's not going to be perfect, but to not do anything is less perfect.
Right, I agree.
The only thing I'll say is, Rachel, the folks you would send it out to are homeowners, and Russ, I think your group are homeowners too. We know that a large portion of the folks that are affected by gentrification are renters. So we need to figure out a way to try to, get those voices heard. I was going to suggest, I don't know how you do it and how you pick who we hear from or not, but if there was a way to maybe have, 2, 3, 4, 5 people lined up at the next meeting and the meeting after that to share their shared experience with us on the Zoom, I think that would speak volumes to other folks that are watching it and might not know what we're really talking about. For a long time, it was folks didn't think gentrification was happening and displacement was happening in Lexington, because I think at the scale that it was happening, it wasn't so obvious to see. But I think that myth has been disproven so far.
Yeah, we can definitely invite some folks to come speak at our next couple of meetings to talk more about it. I think that's a great idea, and then also work and maybe give the survey, maybe not next meeting, but the following meeting after that. So give it a good 2 weeks, you think, to get responses back?
Where do we want them sent? The responses.
Does our group have an email address?
Our group, no, there's the commission as a whole has an email address. I guess the
Is it
logical
as simple as setting up a Gmail account?
Our folks aren't, many of our homeowners do not do email. It'll need to be a paper survey. We don't have email.
Rachel, what have you found to be the most effective way to reach the demographic that we're seeking to reach?
Oh, anytime we have information, I mean, we send out newsletters and occasionally we send surveys. We always do it by paper mail. Our response rate, frankly, is very small, 3% if we're lucky. But we're still very willing to send it, and we can have them returned to us, but that's not gonna, I mean, at some point, all of them are gonna have to be consolidated in order to analyze the data.
How soon are you trying to get the surveys back?
I would say 2 weeks would give us time to try to reach as many people as we could creatively, social distancing.
Okay. I am the neighborhood president in one of the areas that the main gentrification is going on. So maybe if I could get some, I can go out and hand walk them throughout the neighborhood because I'm out there every day. So I think that's what I find is good with us as well. Just like Rachel said, most people in the areas, they don't have email, they don't have computers. So we have to reach them, as they say, boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. So we could do that.
Could we identify those, Shayla, you said earlier that the neighborhoods that were being most ravaged by gentrification were identified. Is there a way that we could find, you know, whether it's neighborhood presidents or association presidents, something in those neighborhoods to say, can you do this for us? Can you hand walk these out if you need to and get those? I mean, if you let us know what churches are in those areas, David and I can get on the phone and take them down there if we need to or help out. But, you know, I think just to make sure we're not excluding people because they don't have access to the internet. And certainly now the library's closed because of coronavirus, that creates an even bigger hardship in that area.
Yeah, I think we can definitely utilize the neighborhood association presidents to get it distributed that way. Mr. Howard, would the city be able to print off some copies for us? There's several copies that we will need.
I would think so.
Okay.
And I have no problem offering up the commission's mailing address as a repository for the surveys to come to us, and then Shayla and I can go through them, and then we can send them all out to you guys, and then we'll analyze them and put them as part of our report, whatever we choose to do with them. So I'll go with Mr. Howard and have that address put on whatever we do.
I'm trying to think this from memory, but I wonder if it would be a helpful question, since we were talking about code enforcement, to add a question that says, you know, have you ever been cited for a code enforcement, just to get a sense about the percentages we're dealing with there.
I don't think that, I mean, it may be a good idea, but you got to remember the areas we're talking about, there's not a lot of home ownership. There's more investment. So maybe the question is, do you see them? Because I know they see them every day. But
I mean, some question, good point, very good point, but just some question that sort of floats that code issue there. You know, have you seen them there?
Well, I think if you want that answer, all you got to do is go to code enforcement and ask. I think they did and Mr. Brown be able to help me, but I think they presented something to the council maybe in March. So you may be able to get that information from there.
Yeah, no, they did, and I can send that a presentation to the co-chairs, and they can share it with this commission, or with this subcommittee.
All right, it seems like we have a plan to distribute the survey. And we want to add a question about code enforcement to the survey.
I think if Mr. Hodge said that that's not a good idea, that's fine. But I'm interested in, I'd like somebody to do a nice big old article on who's buying these properties that get hit with code enforcement. Not for our committee, but you know, what's going on behind that.
And is there a way for us to receive the input of those who are watching on YouTube through this survey, that we could receive their input or through their channels? Would that be a possibility?
I know, Mr. Howard, you said that there's a way for us. Is there a way for us to see the comments, or is it will always be like after the fact?
Well, I think it's mostly after the fact. I will tell you that during this meeting, I brought up the I keep wanting to say Facebook Live for some reason. I don't know why that is. The YouTube stream, and I'm looking at the live comments that they're doing during the chat right now. It's not actually comments, but it's chat. And those occur in time as you watch the later recordings. Those still appear, so they are visible. So that's the only way that I know of at this point. But I'm not the most technologically savvy person you're going to encounter in this process.
And then also perhaps we can see if the city would put the survey up on the website. I know that's another avenue for those that have technology, but we can maybe get it on the commission's page and accessible there as well.
That would be helpful, because those who are watching us obviously have that ability, and they could then provide that to their channels so that we could have this input.
And share it on Facebook, because lots of people, you know, have the phone with Facebook and it's thankfully a very helpfully basic survey that can be, I think, fairly easily filled out on social media.
I think we're working on an assumption here that we should make clear, which is that we're happy for people to pick this up and run with it to their own kind of communities and their own networks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. The more audiences we can hit, the better.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we've got the survey tackled. I just wanted to continue on. Is there any other comments regarding the code enforcement discussion before we move forward? Anybody have any corrective action steps, things that we can do regarding this issue about code enforcement being weaponized in these hard-hit areas? Some ways we can reform that we can recommend to the city. Opening up the process where the complainer has to state their name and we know who they are.
Well, so we ran into a problem with that. You know, that was brought up with the neighborhoods and transition task force, and Shayla knows as well as I was kind of surprised to find out that on the complaint side that, you know, if a resident is trying to secure safe and affordable housing and they call code enforcement, you know, the code enforcement can take the property manager, if they were to take any kind of retaliatory action against that tenant for calling code enforcement, there's really no mechanism in place to file a retaliation complaint. There's nobody there to actually help them. So I'd be hesitant to say somebody had to leave their name, because I mean, if somebody is needing safe and affordable housing and their recourse is to call code enforcement, you know, that's a scary thing. If this is the only place you can afford and you need it fixed up and I have to leave my name, I'm not going to call and I'm not going to complain. So on the complainant side, I could see a problem with that, because I learned that code enforcement, if code enforcement is called and the person is retaliated against, there's nothing that code enforcement can do. There's nothing that our office can do as far as that. And there's really nothing Fair Housing Council can do. So they're kind of flapping in the wind. So it's kind of like sticky situation on the tenant side if you make somebody have to leave their name. So I would have a little bit of issue with that, but certainly that's something we can keep in mind when we formulate these discussions.
I agree with you, Ray. I don't think we should be asking victims to be our policemen.
I
So
agree
how
as
then do
well.
we find out though if code enforcement is being weaponized?
Well, I think it's, I don't know. Maybe, and I don't want to seem like I'm saying something to divert something else, but maybe our focus shouldn't be on code enforcement, because I think what we're talking about is disinvestment and creating unsafe situations. So maybe we could start thinking about, and I don't think we have to come up with the answer today, but what can we do to help discourage or disinvestment, or put pressure on property owners to make sure that they maintain their safe, affordable, or just safe housing, period. And I guess I don't want to say that to get us away from code enforcement, because I think it's anonymous complaint driven for a reason, and I think it may be to protect some people, but maybe we ought to be thinking differently about how we answer the question. Harding, it looks like you were going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'm thinking about this in a slightly different way and in a slightly different context, where, and this is anecdotal information at best, but the code enforcement issues that I'm thinking about are where outside non-owning entities load up a property with code enforcement issues and make that owner unable to either make the necessary repairs or to pay the associated fines that happen when they go beyond the time limit. And it forces the sale of that property. And that displaces that owner. That's the kind of weaponized code enforcement that I'm thinking about, not so much negligent landlords, which I agree is a real issue, but maybe not the one that I'm thinking of that leads to immediate displacement.
And I think you're dead right, exactly what's going on. And I think, not to take anything away from you, Mr. Brown, we keep dodging it. Nobody wants to dig deep into code enforcement. Just like some of these people are talking about defunding the police department, maybe we need to defund the code enforcement. Maybe we need to divide it up to where you got safety issues and cosmetic issues. Because right now they have the police to do whatever they want to do. They can write you up for a chip brick, for a crack piece of siding. Somehow we got to get it under control. And I know nobody wants to dig into it. That's why we continue to have the problem. But we're talking about gentrification. We're talking about having a place for people that don't have as much money. But at the same time, we don't want to deal with the issues that are creating the problem of high housing. How are you going to control it?
No, y'all both right. I was thinking about it differently, but when you're talking about displacement and the pressure coming from being cited, y'all both correct. Yeah. I don't have an answer, but y'all right.
I know that one thing, when I was on the task force, that I brought up was some form of landlord licensing and education piece. In order to be a landlord in Lexington, that you have to go through some kind of educational program, and your property has to be inspected maybe, so that the housing has to be maintained, instead of it being, somebody calling when it's already, in disrepair, and the tenant is, has dirt floors. Maybe there's some kind of process in place that has to happen prior to you even being allowed to be a landlord in the city limits. I
agree to a certain extent with that. But once again, when landlords are paying, going to class, paying for this, who ultimately pays for it? The tenant. So now you're talking about affordable rent compared to going through this. I think what we could do, if a landlord is rolled up so many times, maybe we need to take those people and send those people to the class. Every landlord is not bad, just like every cop is not bad. So, that may work if you rolled up 18 times or 4 times, then you have to go through this process. I agree with that. But on the other end, once again, we need to dig deep into code enforcement, see what's really going on.
I'll weigh in a bit here, and just using the experience of the Davis Park, Davis Bottoms community, and the significant reinvestment that happened here recently with the Newtown Pike Extension project. I think that, you know, for years, there was a lot of disinvestment from Davis Bottoms, and it ripened it to a point where with the new road project coming in, the community was at significant risk of being displaced. And what was required in that instance, and in this, and I would say, thankfully, very much unlike the vast infrastructure improvements that built our highway systems way back in the, golly, I think probably 30s, 40s, 50s. By the time Newtown Pike Extension project came along, federal law required that if you're going to have disparate impact on an income of higher concentration of low incomes and communities of color, then you have to do something to mitigate the risk. You've got to do something to make it right. And I think, and I don't have any like bulleted points about like what has happened systemically throughout Lexington over the course of years and years and years. But some of that has had to lead to the decay of housing stock in communities that we're talking about. And I think there ought to be considerations for reinvesting in a appropriate way that ensures that community members are not being displaced. And that's, I mean, I think when we're talking about code enforcement, we're talking about the fact that it's able to be weaponized towards displacement is we're dealing with symptoms here. The issue is the lack of investment in communities and in such a way that the people that are in the communities and have been there for a long time are able to enjoy the benefits of those improvements. And I think that that's the work that with the Lexington Community Land Trust that we've done in partnership with the Davis Park community was really trying to make sure and ensure that all the housing that gets redeveloped in this neighborhood is affordable. And as we move forward into the further build out of the neighborhood, we're trying to figure out how to make it even more affordable than it is now. And that's going to be tough to do alone, but what it requires is investment by the government to make sure that it happens. Investment from the philanthropic community, investment from getting creative with ways that we can have investments from community members so that they're able to contribute towards the goodness that is coming from that. So investment in a way that doesn't displace, and that is policy that it doesn't displace people.
That, oh, go ahead. Yes, Representative Brown.
Would something from this subcommittee, a statement that gentrification is happening in our city and it's something that needs to be addressed as far as legislation is concerned from the Urban County Council? I think without that, we're kind of shooting in the wind as far as this subcommittee is concerned. I don't know that that has been a definitive statement made that the city has adopted to understand that particular aspect of what's happening in our communities in those areas that have been designated as being gentrified.
I don't know if would the city make that statement, or is this task force, this subcommittee the statement?
I think the subcommittee can make that statement and say that, because for the most part, there's the denial to a very large degree that it is even a concern. And I think a part of what this subcommittee could say is that gentrification and displacement across our city is a concern and is a problem. And we need to face that head up.
And that it has a disproportionately negative impact on Black, Indigenous, people of color, poorer people. This is a bad thing. David and I'd say it's a sin and we need to get right with God. But, however we need to frame that, because I still hear gentrification used in a positive way and in a lot of circles.
I was fumbling around, I'm sorry, everybody, for our minutes, because I was trying to remember what Ms. Akins charged us to do, and part of it was to tell the truth. And if this is the truth, then I think it's part of our responsibility in this time to make that statement as truth, with all of the factors that we framed it in, but that truth needs to be spoken.
I think that's absolutely true. Part of the things that have been happening with the protest and people are asking for is that statement needs to be made that is of concern. And at the end of the day, that what people are frustrated with, that are protesting in the streets, are these underlying issues and circumstances that nobody governmentally will face and or step up to.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think this subcommittee, I think the task force are statements of that there is a problem that we need to address. But I think y'all right. I think we do need to make a written statement and present it. Kind of what I heard, and I think Shayla said it. I think there's an opportunity to address disinvestment of rental property in neighborhoods that are being gentrified. But then to piggyback on what Russ was saying, I think in regards to home ownership opportunity and disinvestment and the lack of opportunity to access resources to invest in the property, I think those are two different paths that we can potentially go down to address what we're talking about. Holding rental property owners more accountable to provide safe housing. And then I think also acknowledging and identifying that opportunities to have access to money, to have access to own and buy property for people of color was limited or non-existent in certain areas in this city where we're seeing neighborhoods being redeveloped and gentrified. And I don't know what is that action item? I know, Russ, you kind of spoke to it, that we can create policies and speak to it, but how do we create something or make a statement to get the private sector as well as government to invest into those areas, into those neighborhoods? I know the city has the Affordable Housing Fund, and we know the majority of that money goes towards rental properties because that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck, where a small percentage goes to home ownership opportunity. But that's how you really solidify neighborhoods and give folks the opportunity to build wealth and to own and to stay in the neighborhoods that they want to be in. How do we get to that point? How do we make that statement and make that happen?
Well, one city I'm looking at really closely right now is Asheville, North Carolina, which just today approved a series of policy measures to do just that, Councilmember Brown. The news that I've been able to read so far is a little, if someone knows more about it than I do, what I've found is relatively vague, but it talks about specifically direct investment in Black home ownership. And so I think that there are levers to pull there, but I mean, it's going to take public money put in the hands of citizens to do, whether it's rental subsidy, whether it's down payment assistance. There are levers that the city has. It's just that it's going to take money. And
in Asheville, as you've mentioned, Harding, that is the language that's being used is it's an expression of reparations in order to reinvest in the Black community of Asheville.
Yes.
It's quite a thing. And I just want to underscore the use of the word policy and how I hope that we will get to the point that we can articulate some policies, because that's when the things get crystallized and really can make a difference if we can understand what policies are going to help to ensure that people are not displaced as much as we're able to do that. Policy change.
Yeah, that's our hope, is that from this subcommittee, that when Ray and I put together a report, we're putting together policy recommendations for the city to take action upon. Yeah. Yes, Representative Brown.
I think what has to be understood is that if we don't face it, we can't fix it. And a large part of what's happening in our community is that we're not facing it. And I would hope that as a result of this subcommittee, that's a statement that we make. That's one of the things that comes out of these discussions, because there are people that don't think that gentrification exists. I talked to a gentleman from some years ago, and the first African-American development in Fayette County was St. Martin Village. That was a part of the Pfister family, carved that area out, what is St. Martin Village now, and intentionally moved to have Black home ownership there in the West End. And what we've got, what I came to understand, I didn't know that up until 1955, African Americans could not borrow money to buy a home or to buy land. And we're still suffering from that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way, and somebody may already have, I hope, but to tell that truth, to talk about the way that Black home ownership has been denied, the denial of the access to build wealth in a home, and then maybe to use the word, and in response to that, we recommend that financial reparations be made to create access to these home ownerships, safe rental properties. Not everybody wants to own a home. So, but how do you, because I think that, the old 12-step language is we're only as sick as our secrets. We are a sick society right now because we've been keeping a lot of secrets that nobody wanted to speak out loud. So I'm sure that information's out there, but about the lack of access to that ability to buy a house in Lexington for the Black community would be helpful to have.
One thing I'll say, Laurie, is not specific to Lexington, but there's a book that I'm in the middle of right now called The Color of Law, which, probably not news to anyone on this call, but just in case, is a good summary of a lot of that.
And I would add to that, Harding, that so Richard Rothstein is the author of that book, and they recently came out with it could have been maybe a 10-15 minute film called Segregated by Design, and it talks about housing history in our country from the beginning, and it specifically talks about policies, and it talks about laws that allowed things such as redlining. And I think if you were able to wrap your arms around quantifying that impact, that would be an opportunity to start talk about reinvestment. Because now for all of those measures that we're taking, and we're persistent and geospecific over the course of years and years and years, a sustainable solution is going to require a geospecific, lasting reinvestment in order to close that gap. But I think, like, if you watch that film, and you could just kind of one by one say, all right, here's the issue. Here's where we've been complicit. Let's start to address it. Go down to the next one. Like, I think that there are some things that you could really start to formalize through that.
You could take my class too if you wanted. I don't.
Russ, can you share is that film on YouTube, Netflix? Can you share that link? Or
I will say, not a shameless plug, but if you go to Lexington Community Land Trust's Facebook page.
Mhm.
We just shared that film a
Perfect.
couple hours ago. So it's probably the most recent thing in our news feed.
I guess if it's something, yeah, obviously we got to know where we've been to know where we're going. Certainly when Shayla and I approach this report, we give a historical context of some of the recommendations that we're making. We may have to defer to some of the scholars that write about the issue and to get some more specific information, but certainly that'd be a way we could definitely approach it. I think it would be foolish not to. So
it all goes under this larger category of telling the truth. And I do appreciate the language about we got to face it if we're going to fix it. And so this is the facing it part. And I think it's helpful to have this history and these resources facing the fact of gentrification. And then, okay, what does fixing call for? Some policies and of course some grappling. So we got a sort of a skeleton now of how we can at least begin to go through this, and good.
One other thing that I want to briefly touch on, since we're in the realm of policy and how do we address the disinvestment, I think it's fair to say that part of the reason that gentrification happens is it's profitable. It makes money for developers, and I've worked with a lot of them. I like some of them, and when we're talking about how do we rectify some of this disinvestment, I think you have to require things. I think encouragement and carrots work not as well as sticks in this scenario. And I think we put a lot of onus on the homeowner or the renter. You know, I was looking at the task force recommendations about improving outreach about the housing rehab program and the emergency home repair program. It puts a lot of work on the people who are struggling, and then all we sit around and do is put money aside to give to the developers who are going to potentially make affordable housing. So there's a real disparate attitude towards the people who need the help and those who don't.
Yeah, Shayla and Ray, I don't want to take us down too far down a rabbit hole or off topic, but I was sitting here thinking, we're talking about disinvestment when it comes to rental property from property owners. But I think another thing that we have to acknowledge, and Ms. Aiken said that we got to speak the truth, is over time in some of these neighborhoods, there's been disinvestment from the city. We're talking about historically Black neighborhoods that have been, I think I can say have been neglected for the most part several decades ago. Because once I think about my grandparents and my great grandparents, they owned property. They had real estate. Somewhere along in generations, their children didn't see the value of it. Either didn't invest in it or maintain the homestead, or they sold it or whatnot. And then we have a generation after that was either caught up in the war on drugs and whatever was going on in the communities that have allowed for them to lose property and the opportunity to build wealth. And that's not by accident. That didn't happen by circumstance. So I think we have to acknowledge that too, and the factors that go around it. Because when we start talking about gentrification and some of the neighborhoods that are impacted, we can also talk about the schools that the kids go to that live in those neighborhoods. We can talk about the condition of the sidewalks and curbs in those neighborhoods as well. And now that we're starting to see the reinvestment from the government in those communities, now they're more attractive for other people to come in and buy and to invest. So there's a bigger story, and there's more to it than just having access to money and having access to be able to buy the properties. I think it's, and George, Representative Brown, I think you know what I'm talking about, and I think you can speak to it as well. I just keep thinking about it. I know my grandparents lived right there on Limestone when I was growing up. and for some reason, you know, folks, family members didn't see the value in maintaining that property or keeping that property in the family. So that's happening too. People are selling and doing something different, but I don't know if it's a lack of education. I don't know if it's a lack of understanding of how wealth is built and created and how you pass it down through generations. But it's not a coincidence that it's happening in the same neighborhoods that we're talking about. So I think we need to put some thought to that. I don't know how we address it, but it may be something in that statement that Lori was talking about. You know, something intentionally was done to disrupt those neighborhoods or give the folks in those neighborhoods not the best chance to succeed.
I'd just like to say thank you, Councilmember Brown, for those comments. But I think that we have an opportunity historically to make a serious difference in what is occurring in our city. Speaking to the statements, the Russ Harding, I didn't know you all before today. Dr. Shine, I think I met you at UK while I was working there. And so I think this group is talking about some things that need to be addressed. And hopefully out of this subcommittee will come a report that will not be put on somebody's on a shelf and just draw dust. Hopefully it's a document that can be a working document that can move Lexington forward in terms of dealing with some of the systemic and historical things that have led to poverty and neighborhoods that have not been able to succeed and or for people to have home ownership. So I am very happy that we're talking about this and the conversations are being that what we're talking about. Hodge, you're in the East End where I am, and I know that you see a lot of properties and the things that are out there, they're real and imagined. But for the people that live here, this is real. As we see people and you see the neighborhood change, and you look at the housing stock and look at bricks and mortar, and I think the city has to we need to, as a task force, make a statement that speaks to that, and to understand. I mean, I'm looking at the item number 2 in the agenda, discuss contributing factors of gentrification in Lexington. I think what we're talking about is just that, is that historically it has been undercapitalized. Neighborhoods have been undercapitalized and people have been denied access to capital and cash to be able to grow and develop and become homeowners. Some people haven't even had the idea. I know that my parents, the people that raised me, well, I was blessed. I had 2 mothers, 2 fathers, and my father and my stepmother bought a house, and they moved to the place where they could in St. Martin Village, and I think their rent was $70 a month. I mean, their mortgage was $70 a month, and my mother and stepfather never envisioned owning anything. All they saw was renting, and that's all they'd ever done the majority of their life. But for the last 10 years of their life, we bought a duplex and we owned it along with the mortgage company, the bank, and et cetera. But we owned where we lived. My mother died in the house that she owned. But so many people live and die in this community that don't have access to capital and cannot access and be a part of home ownership. So I think that probably what we're talking about hopefully will be something that we can get to the government as a policy statement to say that we understand and to even possibly somewhere down the road deal with the institutional biases that lending institutions have been a part of denying people access.
We had a meeting today with the 2 commission co-chairs, and they were very adamant that they were not going to let the mayor let this collect dust on her desk. They were very adamant that this was going to be an ongoing thing and that we're not doing this for naught. So we are doing this because we want action and things to change and something to be done. So the co-chairs are very adamant and we're very strong with the mayor that this is not, we're not doing this just to twiddle our thumbs or to come up with new ideas or just to put out another report, that this is being done so that action can be taken. So we're all on the same page with that.
And I will add that Representative Brown brings up a good point that I wanted to point out is that our subcommittee is named Housing and Gentrification. So we're not just limited to look at the area of gentrification. I mean, you have discrimination, you have rental disparity, eviction disparities, and things of that nature, lending institutions. So as we move forward, we need to decide as a committee what kind of things that we want to bring in that may be root causes of the gentrification. But keep in mind that, you know, we're not limited to just making recommendations on gentrification. I mean, we've been given the broad topic of housing, however way we want to run with that. So we can just keep that in mind as we move forward as well.
Well, since we have just a few minutes left, are there, besides us getting some speakers for our next meeting, are there any specific topics we want to continue to address, or topics that we want to address that we haven't addressed yet that we can put on the agenda for the next meeting? That some issues that are of specific concern to you or your communities that you definitely want us to dive into the next meeting?
Is there a link, Shayla, to the code, housing codes? I love to read stuff. I mean, because like I think sometimes even embedded in the language of what is a code violation is racist. And, you know, and so I just think even, you know, I see Harding nodding. Harding and I may just really like to get into that stuff, but I
love reading it. Yes.
I know,
and it also makes my blood boil because it's all about enforcing an aesthetic of one particular, like whoever wrote that in the 60s probably had an idea of what a neighborhood ought to look like. And if it doesn't look like that, it's a code violation. It has nothing to do with the building code.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I would be interested to see, like, do we even need to say there's parts of this code that don't even make sense anymore?
Mr. Howard, could you provide that link for us? I know all the ordinances are online. I do know that. But could you?
I will look into it, but I don't know right now, but I'll look into it.
Thank you.
Hope to let you know something tomorrow.
Thank you.
One other thing I'd like to offer, and there appear to be some experts that have knowledge of the where to go forward. And as a state legislator, I can put forth model legislation, if there is any, that we can put forward in the 21 session that makes sense for our state. So I am open to any ideas that anybody has. When I first went to Frankfurt, I thought I needed to be the guru of understanding legislation and what needs to be put forward. But I've come to understand in the 6 years that I've been there that that's not the case. That we take ideas and information from people in the community and across the state and try to put legislation together with the LRC staff and to be able to draft legislation for the upcoming session. So feel free to get that to me, or get me information that you may have of things that we can do in the Commonwealth of Kentucky and put forward in terms of legislation, proposed legislation for the 21 session and beyond. We don't have to just stop at 21. We got them as long as I'm there, or as long as your representatives are there. But I offer my office and myself to be able to take ideas for legislation to be able to move that forward. And that can be as much as just a sentence, maybe two, that we can give it to LRC and have them research it and see what is out there. And if KRS and legislation that we have in place now can accommodate what it is that we want to do going forward.
Yeah, to your point, Mr. Brown, there is, I've been following along the YouTube chat, and there are some people who are pretty well adept with the KRS, and there are a number of state laws that prevent cities from doing things to protect renters, which I didn't know. So,
well, maybe we can collaborate and work on that and find those pieces of legislation and maybe get them into the mix in terms of proposed legislation for the 21 session. And make that happen. And that's a good thing that comes out of this subcommittee.
That's good. Any other specific things you would like for us to add to our agenda for the next meeting? All right. I will ask, since we're going to have speakers at our next meeting, if you have folks that you feel passionate about, that, you know, speaker suggestions, please send them to Ray and I, and we'll extend the invites and invite those folks to our next meeting. I think suggested 3 to 5 folks. I think we can definitely do that. So if you have names of folks, just feel free to send them our way. I have a couple of folks in mind as well, so we'll definitely do that for our next couple of meetings. I think that's a great idea. And we'll work on the survey.
One question is that can information, telephone numbers and email addresses be shared for members of the committee? Can we share those?
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Is
Yes.
that okay?
With each other or publicly?
With each other, I
Oh,
think,
okay.
with the committee.
Yeah. We can definitely start that email thread and do that. Definitely.
One thing that may be worth mentioning to potential guests for next week is that if they don't want to be on camera or they don't want to share their name, I think we have to make that totally possible for them.
Yeah, great idea. Yeah.
And somebody having done this in sexual abuse and harassment and misconduct in church scenarios, one of the things we've done is invited people to either record or write a statement out, and then someone reads that for them. And so that's possible. And if you need help with that, Shayla, let me know. I've got all the procedures we've used in the Episcopal Church for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to chime in and say, as somebody that has experienced a very bad meeting when you didn't have to say your name or get on the screen, we got to make sure that we do that the right way.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
If I may, I just want to double check. I think I heard a couple of action items for me, and I just want to double check and see that these are things that you all want before next Thursday's meeting. One was to see if we can get 3 to 5 years worth of code enforcement records or data. Another was whether the city can print out the surveys, which I believe we can, but I'll confirm that tomorrow. Can we see if the city can put the survey on their website and share it on Facebook? I'll check on that and let you know. And then whether there was a link to the housing code. So those are, I believe, are action items for me.
I think there was one more question, Mr. Howard, and that was about the capacity to pull together presidents of neighborhood associations.
Okay.
Also, the drafting or beginning to draft, maybe through the law department, a statement from the committee about gentrification and making sure that that gets into a working document that the city can use. Gentrification and displacement.
I hate to put too much on Mr. Howard, but would it be too much to ask when you're doing the code enforcement violations? Is it any way that you could quickly, and I'm not asking you to spend a lot of time, show which officers it is? Because maybe you got an officer that in code enforcement that's leaning a little bit to the left when he should be to the right.
I will see what's available, and I'll include trying to find out whether or not the code enforcement officers can be identified.
Thank you.
All right. If there is nothing else, then at 8:03 we shall adjourn. Thank you all so much for a very robust discussion tonight. I look forward to our next one, and we've got some homework to do, so I'm excited about it. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.